You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 13th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
We have a dream, and you know what the dream is? We're going to move the Department of Education. We're going to move education into the states, so that the states, instead of bureaucrats working in Washington, so that the states can run education.
Donald Trump is doubling down on his campaign promise to shut the Department of Education, which has announced its staff will be reduced by half. We'll ask why and how this will affect the schooling system, particularly for the most vulnerable in the US. Meanwhile, Trump's tariff war continues. Next in the firing line, European imports of food and drink. What will this mean for both the American consumers and the EU producers of champagne, parmesan and jamón? Northvolt, the Swedish battery manufacturer, has declared bankruptcy. Our Helsinki correspondent unpacks the implications. We'll be in Hong Kong examining the state of the food delivery sector as one of the major players there, Deliveroo, announces its exit from the market. Paul Waldy of the Globe and Mail, who's currently in Kyiv, will take us through the front pages. We'll have a dispatch from MIPIM, the world's biggest property fair taking place in Cannes, as well as a roundup of retail and fashion news. And finally...
When they were coming to Paris to DJ, they were coming also to our radio show. And they were all playing this kind of house, heavily fueled with the garage, gospel, disco feeling.
We visit a new exhibition in Paris, all about the joy of disco. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. The Kremlin has responded to the US efforts to broker a ceasefire with Ukraine by stating it needs more clarification. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is in The Hague after his arrest at Manila Airport on charges of crimes against humanity. And Mark Carney will be sworn in as Canada's 24th Prime Minister on Friday morning. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. But first, the US Department of Education has been unable to dodge DOGE and will now be halved in size by the Department of Government Efficiency, the cost-cutting operation headed by the world's richest man, Elon Musk. 1,300 workers will be fired, with over 500 more being offered severance packages. This aligns with Trump's stated aim of shutting down the education body entirely, though to do so would require congressional approval. I'm joined now by Scott Lucas, adjunct professor at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin. Scott, good to have you back on the show. There's been attempts to close the Department of Education since it was created as a standalone agency back in 1979. Can you give us the background to that?
Well, the reason, Georgina, that why the Department of Education was created as a separate entity really comes out of the 1960s and 1970s, the years of the civil rights movement, when, the issue of race and how many people were deprived of education or equal education because of race, but also the, poverty, that many people didn't get equal education because of where they lived or because of their family's economic conditions. So the idea is that even though most of the funding for education comes from the states, and a lot of the authority over education comes from the states, that the federal government had a role in terms of assisting, in terms of pursuing civil rights initiatives to make sure that no one was discriminated against in getting an education, in terms of pursuing incentives so that people who were impoverished would be able to get to schools where they could get a decent education, and in terms of providing, for example, teacher training and providing guidelines. And although there have been attempts, especially by right-wing Republicans and libertarians, to cut the department or abolish it entirely, especially under the mantra of school choice, it has remained in place for more than 40 years, carrying out those roles, and according to supporters of the department, carrying them out very efficiently. That, in other words, this belief that is being spread by the Trump administration, that they're cutting waste by cutting the Department of Education, that's not true. They're actually cutting effective programs.
So why then is there opposition to the department, which sounds like it does noble work?
Well, part of this is the ideological project of the Trumpists, Project 2025, which was, the blueprint of more than 900 pages to gut U.S. agencies, simply because the idea is to either abolish agencies or bend them to Trump's will. Targeted the Department of Education using the mantras of woke, that too many people in education were woke, as if it's a bad thing to be socially aware, or to say that schools promoted diversity, equity, and inclusion, as if that's a bad thing. And then, of course, when Elon Musk was brought in, with no legal authority, with no constitutional authority, with no security clearance, it simply was the idea that you just simply slash and burn and purge as many employees as you can without actually doing due diligence on what they're actually doing, on what their roles are and what the programs are they're supervising.
So how will the cuts affect its operation and the education system generally? I mean, who's going to be most affected?
Well, let's take, for example, students with disabilities. That the Federal Department of Education is there to ensure that although states implement the programs to ensure that disabled students get equal education, the federal government makes sure it's a level playing field. Then everybody knows the guidelines that need to be implemented, the protections that need to be there. Let's talk about, for example, the training of teachers. That although states have their own teacher training programs, that in terms of ensuring this all feeds into, as it were, a national standard, that's implemented. Let's talk about families who are trying to apply for loans, who are trying to apply for grants for assistance, including for higher education, to make sure that advice is available at a national level, because not all students want to remain in their home states for higher education. Let's talk about making sure that civil rights are protected, that we don't get racial discrimination or discrimination on the basis of class. And then beyond all of that, probably the thing that the Department of Education is best known for is providing for federal grants for students who are on lower incomes to be able to get education all the way through university level. And although the Trump administration says this will not be affected by slashing the Department of Education, well, I'm not sure you can take any assurances at face value given what they have done with other agencies to the point of dismantling them in only 2 months.
I mean, let's look at what they've done, because many of the cuts implemented by DOGE have later been reversed. Why is that? And is it likely to happen in this case?
Well, I mean, there have been court interventions to limit what DOGE has done simply because there's no legal basis for what they're doing. And I have to emphasize this. Elon Musk is not a U.S. government official. He's simply there because he got himself in good with the Trump campaign and because he deployed a group of young men, mainly computer coders, to go in and steal information, sweep up information, and then say on the basis of that, you people have to be dismissed. You have to be fired. Now, what courts can do is, at the very top level, they implemented a freeze. They rejected the Trump administration's freeze on all grants and loans. So they stopped the Trump administration from effectively stopping all support through agencies. In terms of individual agencies, they have been able on the margins to say that this person shouldn't be fired or that perhaps there needs to be a review of this decision by DOGE, but that's only on the margins. The problem here is that the Trump administration has moved so quickly, they're outstripping the deliberative pace of the courts to be able to say whether or not this is constitutional or legal.
I mean, there's been much crowing from Musk about his achievements in cutting government spending, but is there any reliable evidence of success?
So let's cut to what we know, and that is that on its website, DOGE, which again is not an official government department, it's just simply at best an advisory group, claims they have cut about $155 billion in government spending. Experts went in and looked at that, and in fact, they can only see $15 billion that may have been saved by DOGE. And even some of that is not fully supported. And of course, a lot of those claimed, even if you accept the $15 billion in savings, it's savings by cutting jobs of people who actually were doing work that was needed. So this is not cutting waste. This is actually cutting services where you get even these very limited savings.
Well, tell us more about that, because as you say, many of the cuts so far implemented have had serious consequences.
Oh, if you take the U.S. Agency for International Development, for example, which had a $43 billion budget last year, in the guise of disinformation, just absolutely ludicrous claims like sending condoms to Gaza. What you did, and actually by cutting 90% of the programs so far, with the threat to eliminate all of them, is that you stop, for example, programs to check HIV and AIDS in Africa. You stop programs to deal with waterborne diseases and other tropical diseases around the world. You stop programs that support civil society, promotion of democracy. You stop training of independent journalists. You stopped environmental programs. With the cuts at the Environmental Protection Agency, other environmental programs have been slashed. Threats to cut NASA and the national NOAA, cuts aerospace and space exploration programs. The cuts to energy, which have taken place. Georgina, every aspect of the U.S. government is being affected to the point where even what you might consider the sacred programs of the U.S. since the 1930s, Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, although those have not been cut yet, they are under threat from a combination of Republicans in Congress and from Chainsaw Elon.
So, Scott, for the Department of Education to completely close, Congress would have to agree. Is that likely?
I think what the Trump administration is avoiding that simply by effectively whittling the Department of Education down to a rump group. When you cut half of almost 4,100 staff, you immediately cripple the agency. I think you're going to see further forced resignations, or let's say encouraged resignations, or further firings to come. The head of the Department of Education, Linda McMahon, has no qualification to be there. She's the co-owner of the World Wrestling Enterprises, WWE, and a very close friend of Donald Trump. That's why she's there. So you leave the agency there in name, but in terms of what it actually does, it's just a shell.
Scott, thank you very much indeed. Scott Lucas there. This is The Globalist. It's 8:12 in Rome, 7:12 here in London. American lovers of European delicacies may soon have to forego them as Donald Trump threatens tariffs on EU imports from April the 2nd. Well, last year, the bloc exported 38 billion euros worth of food and drink to the US. So this is going to hurt not just the consumers, but also the producers, and may even destabilise the world economy. Well, I'm joined now by Amy Casman, who's Rome correspondent at the Financial Times. Amy, good morning to you. What is the detail on these proposed tariffs?
Well, as ever with Donald Trump, we don't have exactly the detail, but he has threatened to impose import tariffs of 25% on all EU imports from April 2nd. He's also made other vague threats that have said he's going to impose, tariffs based on his assessment of what's unfair in the whole economic system of the EU. So right now, there's just actually a lot of uncertainty and concern in the EU about what exactly is going to happen.
So, we have been here before when Trump imposed tariffs on a variety of European products back in 2019. Does this differ?
Look, yes, the tariffs that were imposed in 2019 were related to a very specific dispute. The U.S. was unhappy with state aid to European plane maker Airbus. And so the tariffs that he imposed were very specific, and they were, in fact, kind of allowed by a court, and they were in retaliation for the state aid that Europe was giving to Airbus. So they made a list of very specific products. Some things were included, some things were excluded. Parmesan cheese included, subjected to tariffs. Dutch Edam and Gouda cheese excluded, not subjected to tariffs. But this right now is a much bigger thing, where Donald Trump is clearly using tariffs in a way as a much bigger weapon of economic warfare to try to force jobs to America, to try to force manufacturing investment to America. So I think there's a feeling that this time it could be much broader. No one knows if there might be some carve out for some specific products.
So I wonder what this means then for the retail and hospitality sectors in the US. They've been able to rely on large markups on European food and drink just to keep afloat.
That's right. The restaurant industry uses a lot of, for restaurants in America, wine is a very important profit center. And I think the problem that this is having is there's just so much uncertainty. No one knows at this point in time whether he's going to impose all these tariffs for real. As we've seen with Canada and Mexico, there's been a lot of flipping and flopping, and they're on and they're off. And, there's a feeling, could there be some last minute breakthrough that subverts these tariffs? Will there be some carve outs for some specific products? So if you're like, say, a restaurant owner trying to plan the wine list for your summer menu or your summer season, you really have no idea, if you can import Italian or French sparkling wines at, what price you would have to price them at. So it causes a lot of uncertainty, and especially for restaurants, which, as you say, do have very high markups on certain products that they import from Europe, and which are then very important for their bottom line.
Do you think then that Americans, as has been suggested, will just buy local? I mean, and are local equivalents available? Can the US fill this vacuum?
I mean, of course, look, the U.S. and California has, very large wine industries, but then there are, other people who will say, but champagne is champagne and nothing can possibly replace it. Certain cheeses like parmigiano, I mean, they're very particular products that are made and deeply rooted in the places where they're made. And if you're an aficionado of these things, there isn't going to be a local alternative. On the other hand, if you're kind of a cost-conscious consumer, you will probably be seeing what else you can find.
Well, let's look at the places where they're made. How will this impact on producers in Europe?
I think the producers are very, very worried and very concerned. The U.S. is Italy's number one market after Germany. I think producers of these products are concerned. America has acquired a big taste for these special European delicacies and treats. They consume a fair amount of them. I think there was almost $1 billion worth of champagne drunk last year in America. And I think that there is a lot of concern in Europe that there will be a big hit to volumes as kind of more cost-conscious consumers switch. Of course, the rich, who love these things will, I'm sure, continue to buy them. The 25% increase won't be such a knock. But I imagine that a lot of these producers and consortiums of producers are going to start looking for new markets. Where else can they start to sell these things? As somebody said to me, if every Chinese person would eat 100 grams of Parmesan cheese every year, the entire production of the year would be absorbed by China. So I think you will see producers looking for other markets. Where can they make up for these lost volumes? But it's a long work to make people get a taste for something as particular, for example, as Parmesan cheese. But, tastes change, and I think they'll be looking for new markets or hoping for carve-outs.
And does the EU plan to retaliate?
Well, you'll see that the EU is trying to show that it's willing to defend its interests without being overly escalatory. So, in fact, this week, Trump tariffs on aluminum and steel have taken impact. About the EU exports about $28 billion worth of aluminum and steel to the U.S. And the EU did announce tariffs on goods equivalent to about 26 billion euros. So I think there is a sense that the EU will try to retaliate, not necessarily in such a hard and aggressive manner as was the kind of the noises coming out of Canada. I think they are insisting that any response will be proportionate, but I'm not sure what will happen if Trump really goes ahead and puts 25% tariffs on everything from the EU to the US. But I do think that they will look to retaliate, to say, we're not just going to stand here and take this without doing anything.
I mean, they haven't come into force yet, and with Trump's record, they may never do so. Nevertheless, is the suggestion of higher prices already having an effect?
Well, as I said, I think it is a problem for planning. I think that people that want to import, but we also did see last year that there was a lot of front running, meaning a lot of European exporters of things like olive oil, wine, cheeses they were rushing their stuff and have continued to be rushing their stuff, as far as I know, to the U.S. ahead of the imposition of tariffs. People saw that this was coming and this was a risk. So they were accelerating their dispatches of these treats over to the U.S. So I do think that a lot of traders and wholesalers and distributors have pretty high stocks. So that will be a bit of a buffer. But I think the minute that the tariffs are imposed, it will send kind of ripples through the supply chain, and prices are likely to rise for consumers. And of course, those stocks already in the US will only last for so long. And then at a certain point, it is going to bite.
Amy, thank you very much indeed. That's Amy Kasmin there. Now, still to come on the programme.
The rhetoric may change at a high level, but I think underlying it now, people understand it's intrinsically part of how we make decisions.
We head to Cannes to get the latest trends in the real estate sector. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio with me, Georgina Godwin, and joining me down the line from Kyiv is Paul Waldy, who's Europe correspondent at The Globe and Mail. Paul, good morning to you. You're in Ukraine right now.
I am indeed, yes, just outside Kyiv.
Let's start, though, back in your home country, Canada, and continue on a theme that's been very big in the programme so far today, and that is tariffs. So there is a big meeting coming up. Tell us more.
Yes, this is, of course, the ongoing saga of Canada trying to get its head around whatever Trump decides kind of almost hour by hour when it comes to tariffs. And, of course, this is a huge deal for Canada because tariffs of the order of 25%, even on steel and aluminum, that's going to have a really big effect on the Canadian economy because, of course, we rely on the U.S. for between 75 and 80% of our trade. So it's our biggest single export market, and anything Trump does tariff-wise has a pretty severe and immediate impact. So today, Ontario Premier Doug Ford and the federal finance minister Dominic LeBlanc are heading to Washington. They want to meet Howard Lutnick, Trump's big treasury and sort of business guru, and also some other administration officials. And really what they're trying to do is get their heads around or come to some kind of understanding of what the strategy with these tariffs is. Because I think right now, if anything, Canadians have just been completely perplexed by which tariffs are coming when and how high and how long they're going to last.
And of course, Trump has been very personally rude about Ford.
He has been rude about Ford. He has been rude about Justin Trudeau, the outgoing prime minister. He's been rude about a lot of people. And of course, that's going to be the next big thing for Canada. On Friday, Mark Carney is going to take over. He's going to be sworn in as prime minister. Very, very different person than Justin Trudeau. And it'll be interesting to see how he interacts with Trump and what kind of message he brings to Trump and how he'll deal with Trump, because of course Trump has not been keen on Trudeau, and we'll have to see if he's any better dealing with Mark Carney.
Let's go to where you are now, and of course that's Ukraine. What's the latest reporting from there?
Well, of course, everybody's waiting to see here if Russia will accept this ceasefire proposal. And you know, in the interim, nothing really has changed on the battlefield in terms of the severity or intensity. We had more missile strikes or attempted missile strikes here in Kyiv overnight. And, you know, in Kursk, that portion of Russia that Ukrainian troops seized last August and have been trying to hang on to, it looks like they're falling back a lot. There are reports today that as much as 90% of the territory has been reclaimed by Russian forces. Vladimir Putin made a surprise visit there yesterday, which kind of indicates he's feeling pretty confident that they're going to get this territory back. And that will be a huge blow to Ukraine because they were hoping to use the Kursk region, or what they'd captured in the Kursk region, as a bargaining chip in any peace negotiations. So if they lose that, they lose what, you know, little leverage one could argue they have on those talks.
Well, what is the general feeling there about these ceasefire talks? What do Ukrainians feel?
Well, I mean, I was talking to a bunch of people yesterday, sort of in central Ukraine in the Independence Square, and you really get a mixture. A lot of people obviously are hopeful that this war will end. They don't want it to continue, just like probably anybody anywhere doesn't. But they're very wary and skeptical about this agreement. They don't trust Vladimir Putin. They've run out of trust of Donald Trump. They just don't think anybody really, other than their own president, is acting in Ukraine's interest or really cares about Ukraine's interests. So they're not confident that this ceasefire, A, will take effect, and B, will lead to any kind of lasting peace. So there's a real kind of resignation that this war isn't stopping anytime soon.
And finally, let's have a look at this great story from The Guardian about bone fragments of the oldest known human face being found in Western Europe.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Researchers, archaeologists in northern Spain, they've been working in an area for a while that's been pretty rich for paleontology, but they uncovered what they think is a part of the left face of a human. They're not sure what kind of human. That's part of the mystery here. That's between 1.1 million and 1.4 million years old, which would make it the largest remains of a human in Western Europe. There was talk that, Homo erectus and Homo sapiens kind of came up from Africa into Georgia about 1.8 million years ago, but they'd never found any kind of remains this far west. So that's the initial finding, but now they're trying to figure out just what this thing is, because most of the time they've been thinking that Homo erectus, which is pretty much similar to us, were the people that were in this area at that time. But this fragment seems to not be quite clear if it's Homo erectus, Homo sapien, or some other kind of variant of the human evolutionary branch. So there's still a bit of mystery surrounding this, but it's really opened up a whole new era, a whole new area, I guess I should say, in terms of where we all came from and when we kind of arrived in Western Europe.
That's very exciting. We may not be who we think we are.
Yeah, exactly. There may be a whole new cousin or relative that we didn't know about.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. That's Paul Waldy talking to us from Ukraine. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Russia is waiting for more details on the US ceasefire plan that Ukraine has approved. The Kremlin said it was expecting more clarification on the deal from US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz via various diplomatic channels over the next few days. Rubio said that if Russia turns down the deal, it would be highly unfortunate and make their intentions clear. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is in The Hague after his arrest at Manila Airport on charges of crimes against humanity. He'll be held in a detention unit before being brought before a judge to hear charges resulting from a high number of killings during his war on drugs, which began in 2016. And Mark Carney will be sworn in as Canada's next Prime Minister on Friday morning, marking the final day of Justin Trudeau's more than 9 years in power. Carney, a former central banker who led the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, was elected leader of the Liberal Party of Canada on Sunday. He'll become Canada's 24th Prime Minister. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. And now for a closer look behind the headlines. Monocle's Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsoff tells us about the ripple effect of Sweden's Northvolt declaring bankruptcy.
Northvolt, the Stockholm-based manufacturer of battery cells for electric cars, was once heralded as Europe's potential breakthrough star in a market otherwise dominated by China. But yesterday it filed for bankruptcy. Despite being one of the continent's best-funded startups, with more than $13 billion in capital, the company faced severe cash flow issues. It was also plagued by production difficulties that led car makers, such as BMW, to cancel orders. When Monocle visited Northvolt's vast gigafactory in Skellefteå last year, the firm was only able to produce a fraction of the promised 16 gigawatt-hour per year worth of battery capacity. The scale of the investment from the likes of BlackRock and Volkswagen underlines the opportunity for a European maker that can get the model right. But Northvolt's failure will give China renewed vigor in the long-term trade war. This was an outage that Europe could ill afford. The continent must lead a new charge on renewable energy.
That was Petri Burtsoff. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. delivery has become essential in our daily lives, yet the market is dominated by just a few global tech giants. Now, UK-based Deliveroo has announced its withdrawal from Hong Kong in April. Dr. Kenneth Kwong, who's an assistant professor of marketing at the Hang Seng University in Hong Kong, joins me to talk about this. Kenneth, many thanks for coming on the show. What was the state of Hong Kong's food delivery market before Deliveroo decided to exit? Can you give us some background?
Yeah. I can say even before the announcement of the exit on this Monday about the Deliveroo, the market is already, very tough, getting tough and tough. Especially we can see several restaurants, no matter big or small, close down their business in Hong Kong. And also there is a trend to dine and eat in Shenzhen. And it's more obvious in a lot of the city where you're close to the border. So actually, the spending is decreasing in Hong Kong. And so I think it is already very fortunate to keep the existing demand, not to mention any expected growth. And also this market, I think the delivery market, the profit margin is very tiny. The operation cost is higher, and a larger portion of the bill go to the restaurant as well as the rider, and so leaving a very little profit to the food delivery platform.
And yet other competing apps are doing very well. What factors are allowing companies like Kita to grow their market share?
I think there are two major reasons. First, I think Kita, apply the technology very well. I think they know how to match the order so they can increase the efficiency. So my understanding is each rider may carry 3 or 4 orders each time, rather than the rider only carry 1 order each time. And the other advantages I can see is the marketing strategy. So I think the Kita, the marketing strategy, for example, low subscription fee for the customer and a low minimum charge, and most important, you also offer the exclusive menu, talking about for a single person. So it gives more flexibility to the customer. They don't have to worry that they have to order a lot, and even just a small order, the Kita will also deliver to the customer.
And what about Food Panda?
Food Panda, I can see that it does not offer this what we call the exclusive menu, but I think Food Panda compete on different segment. So maybe Food Panda will target different customer because they work with a different restaurant group. Okay, so I think Food Panda try to differentiate from Kita, not from those general customer, but more a niche one. Okay, for example, customer perhaps they will spend more for each order.
So now that the market is about to become a duopoly between Food Panda and Kita, what changes do you anticipate in the future in terms of things like pricing or the impact on drivers even?
To me, I don't think the price will increase immediately because the market remains quite weak nowadays. I think the customer, at the end, they do make a choice. And also because Hong Kong is a very small and very convenient, if the price really increase a lot, I think the customer will just go down and to buy food by themselves instead of asking for this delivery service. But to the rider, I think, they have to improve their service. Now, we have a free operator, and next month we only have 2. So some rider need to improve their service in order to keep the place with the market.
And tell us about the general size of the market. Are Hong Kongers generally keen on home delivery?
I don't think, as I just mentioned, Hong Kong is a very small place, a very convenient. We can go downstairs to get our food easily. So, I think, it's not that very keen, but sometimes, we are a bit tired, okay, and so we don't really want to go out, and so we might order food, especially during the lunchtime. I think, when we be quite busy, and people will order food and bring back to their office, etc.
Now, Deliveroo is a UK-based company. What potential impact do you think its withdrawal from the Hong Kong market might have on the global food delivery market?
I think the decision for Deliveroo to leave Hong Kong is a kind of a commercial decision, as they say that they don't make any profit in Hong Kong market. So I think it is wise to reallocate the resources to the other market. For example, in Europe. So to me, I think the lesson that we can learn from the Deliveroo, when it has to leave Hong Kong, I think we have to achieve a certain level of scale to remain competitiveness and operational viable. So to me, according to the figure, the Deliveroo seem to be the weak one. Okay, we're talking about 14-something% for the KitKat, and then 30-something for the Foodpanda, and Deliveroo is the small one. So I think we need to have a certain scale in order to survive in this market. Secondly, I think we have to look for a better way to leverage the technology. So, we're talking about the apps. We need the technology, okay, try to match the customer order with the food delivery in order to create value. Finally, I think we have to work closely with the restaurant to design some exclusive menu for the customer in order to make difference, okay, than the other food delivery platform.
Dr. Kenneth Kong in Hong Kong. Thank you very much indeed. This is Monocle Radio. Monocle Radio is in Cannes all this week for the world's premier property fair, MIPIM. Monocle's editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, spoke with Anthony Duggan from Knight Frank, an international real estate advisory business based in the UK. Anthony's responsible for European business as the chair of Knight Frank Europe. Andrew began by asking about the state of the real estate industry.
Real estate's in this really interesting point, I think, looking for that recovery post-pandemic and then the sort of movement out of interest rates and the financing structures, which are so important for real estate. We all came to MIPIM this year, I think, with some positivity and hope that the markets were opening back up again. We certainly saw an improvement at the end of last year. The financing structures allowing more investors to take positions, which helps fuel the development, it helps fuel the market opening back up again. I think the last couple of weeks with the US manoeuvring has just added an extra layer of questioning again into what 25 is going to look like. But underlying that, I think everybody's really excited about where the market is. And I think if you step back away from the financing and you move into the demographics, into the digitalisation, the decarbonisation, all of those things are still there. So it's that signals versus noise thing, I think. MIPIM comes at a really interesting point where there's a lot of noise again in the system. What I'm really interested in finding out over the next couple of days is what does that really mean and how systemic is that going to be, or do we expect things to move through the year and the year ahead?
Let's take some of those trends. You're talking about sustainability, environment. We're seeing some pushback again in the US. People may be carrying on doing some of these things, but using different words so as not to rile certain investors. Mm-hmm. Do you see a change in course on that, or do you think that people are committed to decarbonisation, to building in a greener, cleaner way? Is that just now embedded into the way that money's raised, investment happens, what companies demand because of their employees as well?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely embedded. I think it's part of the system now. We did a survey last year where we asked investors how they account for decarbonisation in terms of their investment decision making. 70% of them said it was absolutely essential. They need to see the data on an asset basis to understand if they're going to make that investment or not. That data is super important now for every decision that's being made. I don't see that going anywhere, whether, as you say, that's an investor, a developer, or importantly an occupier, those end users who are looking for that best-in-class space. They need it to be part of their programme. So I think the rhetoric may change at a high level, but I think underlying it now, people understand it's intrinsically part of how we make decisions around real estate.
And when you look at the individual markets across Europe, do you see difference in trends or the pace of adoption, or do you see some odd quirks that are coming through that you think, oh my God, that's surprising that Spain pushes on this, but we don't?
I see it's fairly ubiquitous, although running at slightly different paces. I think you see what you expect to see. Some of the Nordic countries are doing some really fantastic things. It's really embedded in the regulation now in places like the UK, increasingly in France and Germany as well. world. So that's being driven by governments. And then places like Spain, again, the institutional nature of the developers, the investors, the architects are sort of bringing it along for the ride, I think.
And tell me about where people want to live and how they want to live. The interesting thing for a company like yours is, you need to be an economist, you need to be looking at the numbers and all the data, but you're also in the business of how people feel about what's the world telling them they need to do. Post-pandemic, we saw a shift in how people, where they wanted to live, how they wanted to live, the kinds of workspaces they wanted. Now when you look at people's demands and needs, what kinds of trends are you seeing there?
One of the things that we saw post-pandemic was the sort of race for space, I think it was called, where people started to move out of cities and look for more space and more green space. We're seeing that reversing pretty quickly now. The draw, the magnetism of cities is absolutely back again, and people are moving back into the cities, whether that's in the residential real estate, the offices, the retail. And so that's the thousands of years of evolution of people getting together, I think, is still as powerful as it ever was. We're seeing a generational wealth shift. We've just released our wealth report, which looks at sort of wealth at the top end. And one of the things that we're tracking very closely now is how that wealth is moving from the older generations into the younger generations. That wealth is also becoming slightly more diverse in terms of who owns that wealth as well. And that's changing the way that people are thinking about how they own real estate, where they own real estate, what that real estate should be doing, in terms of having a more altruistic view in some cases on how they make their money work.
When we came here 2 years ago, I think nearly every city mayor we spoke to was talking about life sciences. It was everything was going to be, every building was being converted into life sciences, and education was at the fore. Maybe a little bit less coming up in conversations this year. There was a lot of talk about the conversion of office buildings for other uses. Again, interesting in some key cities, especially if you've got prime office space now in demand at higher prices than ever before. All those ups and downs. Just give us a snapshot of what you think is playing out in cities for your investors, for people you see who are making and creating our cities. Where are we at? What
I really love about real estate is that dynamism, isn't it? It's that different uses that you get on land. It could be an office building one day, it could be student housing. We've got a huge demand for data centres at the moment, so we're looking at a lot of land and where it's appropriate for data centres around the world. And I think that use of land for so many different things is absolutely key. But that mix in cities around, it needs to have some education in there, and that high-class education, that high-class culture and leisure that sort of brings that amalgamation that people want to experience as part of it. We're absolutely seeing the resurgence of people understanding that the office has got a critical part to play in people's lives and in cities as well. That it was so overdone, that point in time where people said we won't need offices anymore. We see a big push in terms of the best quality offices. People are saying we know the best place for people to be is working together collaboratively. We understand that flexibility is important to people in their lives. So if we want people to come in and come together, we want them to be in the best quality environment to do that. And so you look at cities like London and Paris, rents for the best quality space continuing to move upwards. At the same time, there just isn't enough of the space being developed because of the financial position we've been in the last couple of years. That's putting increasing pressure on those best quality spaces.
Anthony Duggan, chair of Knight Frank Europe there, speaking to Monocle's editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, at MIPIM in Cannes. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Well, it's time to talk retail and fashion news now with Rebecca Tay, who's an expert in retail and also a brand consultant. She joins us on the line now from Sydney. Hello to you, Rebecca.
Good morning, Georgina.
Now, there's a couple of stories here which might appear to contradict each other. They're about Inditex, which, of course, is the company that owns Zara. Tell us about this.
Yes, so they do appear to contradict each other because the company Inditex, which owns Zara, as you said, their sales are up 4%. So they have met their profit expectations for the full year ending in January. However, their shares took a little bit of a tumble because that's actually down from last year. So last year they were up 11%. So this year being up only 4% is quite a big difference. And the board has had to sort of adjust expectations for the full year as a result. But then contradictory to that, as you alluded, the CEO, so Amancio Ortega, who founded Inditex about 60 years ago, who is actually, I think the 14th wealthiest man in the world, he's set to receive the biggest dividend this year. So even though the shares are not up as much as they would like, he's getting a 3.1 billion euro dividend to his family office.
Which is a great deal of money. But in terms of what we've been talking about in the rest of the programme, obviously the news on tariffs is huge. Is that having an effect in this story?
Yes, definitely. So the United States is Inditex's second biggest market. So obviously with all of the things that are happening in the US with the tariffs, I think a spokesperson from the company specifically said, sometimes with contradictory news happening within one day, the market has been quite volatile. So sort of alluding to the fact that all of these things that have been happening in the US have been having an impact as well on Inditex's shares.
Right. So we were talking about one of the world's richest men, and here's another, that's Bernard Arnault, who, of course, is at the helm of LVMH. He plans to stay there now until he's 85.
Yes, he's definitely, not planning to retire anytime soon. So he turned 76 in March, just I think a few days ago or a week ago. And he kind of quietly put through this sort of notice to the shareholders, which basically eliminates any sort of clauses that mean that he has to retire. So at the moment, the existing clause within the shareholder documents is that he would have to retire next April. But he's basically putting forward a clause that eliminates that and would allow him to stay as CEO and also chairman of the board until he's 85. So another 9 years, I suppose. But yeah, another decade, essentially.
Let's look at one of his children, Frederick, who clearly isn't going to take over from his father within the next 10 years, but is going to become chief executive of Loro Piana.
Yes. So Frederick is, I believe it's his third child. So he's got a daughter. He's got 5 children. The eldest is a daughter. Frederick was previously, he looked after all of the LVMH watches. He was CEO at TAG for a little while, and he's now been moved over to CEO of Loro Piana, as you said. So they've had a hugely successful number of years, largely in part due to the quiet luxury trend. So, kind of unlogoed cashmere sweaters, really beautiful kind of loafers and very expensive luxury goods. And he's now been announced as CEO there. The current CEO will be heading over, so a little bit of a shuffling. He's going to become deputy CEO at Louis Vuitton. So a bigger job for the current CEO, but obviously a big step up for Frederick himself.
And other changes at LVMH because Jack McCullough and Lazara Hernandez have signed deals with the company to take over Loewe. And now that the knock-on appears to be that Jonathan Anderson is going to take over at Dior.
Yes. So I think I don't know if it's officially been announced just yet. I think there's a lot of rumors saying that it's going to happen today, so perhaps the next hour or so. But Loewe didn't show this season at Fashion Week. Jonathan Anderson, who's the creative director there, he presented in the showroom instead, a really beautiful collection, but a lot of people were really seeing it as a swan song. So kind of all of the brand codes, a lot of fringed leather, really kind of statement, beautiful, beautiful, incredibly beautiful pieces. But yes, the big rumor is that that Jonathan Anderson will head from Loewe to head up all of the categories at Dior. So men's, women's, all of the accessories. It's a big job, definitely, for Jonathan.
Absolutely. Let's now look at what's going on at Versace.
Yes, so another kind of musical chairs. At Versace, there's sort of rumors that Prada Group is potentially going to be purchasing it. I think at the moment they have a 2-week notice period or a 2-week period to exclusively look through all the financials. But on the creative side, there's been a little bit of conversation about Donatella and who's going to be, what's the succession plan there. And the latest rumor, again, potentially confirmed today or potentially in the next few days, is that Dario Vitale, who's currently at Miu Miu, will be heading over to succeed Donatella. So he has been kind of Miuccia Prada's right-hand creative at Miu Miu, and Miu Miu, again, for the last 3 to 5 years has done exceedingly well, kind of can't really sort of hit a wrong note at the moment. And there's, I think, a deal of pressure on him to sort of turn around Versace, which has sort of been struggling.
And finally to Canada and the department store Hudson's Bay. It's 355 years old. It's a very storied shop. It's reportedly filing for bankruptcy. Why?
Yeah, this is I'm Canadian, so this is a bit close to my heart, but it's, we grew up in Canada knowing that Hudson's Bay is sort of the institution. As you said, it's 355 years old, but essentially it just has too much debt. So I think department stores around the world have been struggling. Retail customers are just shopping directly from brands now. They're not necessarily going to department stores the same way that they used to. And I think since the pandemic and even a little bit longer ago, Hudson's Bay in particular has had quite a lot of debt. So inflation, the trade tensions right now with between the US and Canada definitely do not help. They're saying that they're entering a proceeding similar to bankruptcy protection, and they may try and get rid of some of the stores or the leases on the stores, and try and seek protection from some of its creditors. But there's a lot of sort of call to try and save it because it is such an institution. But we'll have to see whether that's possible or not.
I mean, it's survived for so long, and it's really adapted. It started as a fur trader.
Yes, that's right. So it started out as a fur trader. I think we're always told in Canada that it's the oldest department store in the world because it started in the 1700s, trading fur pelts and beaver pelts when Canada was first colonized. And then it became known for its wool blankets. So I think in Canada, when you grew up, a lot of people have this sort of 5-stripe point blankets. So it's the kind of navy blue, green, red, yellow, and black stripe. But then similar to other retailers and department stores, it's kind of branched off into so many different categories: menswear, womenswear, home, every category that you can imagine. So a lot of stock, and a lot of stock that's not being sold, I think, at the moment.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. That's Rebecca Tay there. And this is The Globalist. And now we head to Paris. The latest exhibition at Philharmonie de Paris is dedicated to disco. In Disco, I'm Coming Out, visitors will find out more about the 70s genre that dominated the airwaves around the world, including, of course, in France. The show examines the story of disco, which is deeply rooted in the history and culture of Black America. It's curated by Jean-Yves Leloup. Monocle Radio's Fernando Augusto Pacheco caught up with Leloup, who told him about his first dab with disco.
As a kid, I was listening to this kind of music, and my first record was YMCF by the Village People. That was a 12-inch. I thought it was a LP, but that was a 12-inch, in fact. I was a bit surprised, but it was only like 2 tracks. So that was what a kid could listen to in 1978, and I was really into the Chase track by Giorgio Moroder from the Midnight Express soundtrack. That was one of my favorite track at the time, and it's still the same. So I was into this kind of popular music, as many other popular music of the time. It can be pop or French chanson or rock. And during the 80s, I was more into, I would say, new wave and a bit more gothic music, and was a bit more into more Joy Division than New Order, for example. And so during this more new wave or darker period, disco was something really like out of fashion for a teenager like me. And after I went through the whole house and techno and rave revolution, I was a raver, I was a clubber. And as many other people who worked on this project, who also documented the disco years, they're all coming from the house era, or the Detroit, Chicago house techno era. So, and there was a very natural connection between disco and the DJ culture of the 90s. So slowly we got back to disco through the house culture and this DJ culture from the 1990s. We heard so many, like, for example, not so many British DJs, but more like DJs from New York or Chicago. They were very often coming to DJ. I had a daily radio show on a French TV, radio station called FG, which was the first really radio station dedicated to electronic dance music. So we had so many DJs from the New York scene or from the Chicago scene, some of the best, some of the greatest DJs. They all came when they were coming to Paris to DJ. They were coming also to our radio show. So, and they were all playing this kind of house, heavily fueled with the garage, gospel, disco feeling. So that was always been present during these years. Even if I was also into techno and into trance and also sometimes more experimental ambient music, but I would say that the lyrics, the refrains, the voices of disco have always been present during this 1990s period, during this techno house era.
I wonder if you can introduce us to the space. I've seen plenty of imagery because, like your Electro exhibition, is a very beautiful, interactive exhibition as well. It's not just kind of some vinyls on the floor. So tell us a bit more, because did you want to recreate a dance floor?
Not really recreate a dance floor, but working on a kind of an immersive exhibition space with a very, you can really visit the exhibition in a really free way, as you were walking in a club or in another space. Of course, the exhibition is really structured with 4 parts, with sub-parts, but you can very freely walk inside the exhibition. And because it's not totally chronological, so it's more like we have different themes, like the music and the black culture, the political side and the LGBT side, the discotheque era and its inventions, the dance and the body, and also the eternal comeback of the disco since 1980, which is the last part of the exhibition. So you can freely let your body flow inside the exhibition. And we have a lot of neons, for example. It can be a reproduction of old neons, like a reproduction of the Paradise Garage neon, but it can be also a neon by artists. So you have slogans, lights, and also a lot of mirror balls, which were seen by contemporary artists also. So it's full of impressions, lights, illusions. We have also on the floor a whole series of kind of, I would say, printed carpet with illusions on the floor. So the discotheque was the world of light and sound and illusion. So we wanted to have this kind of very funny, colorful environment, even if we are also an art museum, a music museum, so we really want to have a very serious content also. So the idea was to have a kind of a balance between this kind of a very joyful visit and also a very well documented series of items, texts and objects.
That was Jean-Yves Laloupe, who is curator of Disco I'm Coming Out, which is out now at Philharmonie de Paris until the 17th of August. And you can listen to the full interview with Jean-Yves on the latest episode of the Monocle Weekly. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Anita Riotta and Monica Lillis, our researcher Francesca Gilks and our studio manager Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Flynn Simons and David Stevens. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing will be live at midday in London. The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.